If you have followed Artifact of the Week for any length of time, you know how much I find value in photo albums and scrapbooks. The snapshots and photos found in these treasures tell stories by freezing moments in time to be viewed by others later. Back in June of 2022, we featured a photo album telling the story of two scouts and their 74-day and what we believe to be a 600-mile bike ride through New England in the summer of 1939. More on the distance traveled later. Back when we told the story the first time, we didn't know anything about the person who took the photos, but we did know his companion was a fellow scout named Russell. This week, we're going to revisit this epic summer adventure and learn a whole lot more about the trek and the two scouts involved in this edition of Artifact of the Week. So the first time we traveled New England through the photos found in this photo album, we were guided by the handwritten notes placed next to the images, with the journey beginning on June 12th, crossing from Fort Lee, New Jersey into New York City. We didn't know the name of the photographer, but we did know his companion's name was Russell. Recently, Chris Elliot, the NSM Collections Curator, uncovered 3 additional matching photo albums, one of which was filled with newspaper clippings, but not just any clippings. Towards the back of the album, there were 8 articles written by none other than the photographer and detailed their 74-day New England trek as a series of letters written to their fellow scouts back home. The author and photographer was 18-year-old Norman Powers, an Eagle Scout with Troop 37 of Peoria, Illinois. His traveling partner was Ruster Buster, who went by Russell. Buster is a fellow scout from Troop 37. The articles, or letters, appear to have been published weekly starting on July 6th. The first article is written 12 days into their adventure on June 24th, but references events from the previous days. Each letter begins with "Dear Scouts" and ends with "Yours, Norman Powers." The road through Rhode Island is a very interesting one, and we stopped at every historical marker. Both of us have a coat of tan that doesn't come off when we wash. For a while, we could hardly sleep, and in the morning, we were almost too stiff to move. Rhode Island is less than 40 miles across, and we crossed it in about 3 hours. That evening, the hostel mother took us to the beach for clam chowder and clam patties. The patties were like French fried donuts and tasted mighty fine. We then went to see a Coast Guard station, and it was too late to see the lighthouse. The keeper took us through the Coast Guard house. He took us to the lookout tower and the radio room. On Thursday, June 22nd, we started for Providence. The road was nice and wide, and a cool breeze was blowing from the ocean. Our hostel in Providence was at the YMCA. As we weren't very tired, we started out to see the city. It is built on a very steep hill and in some places goes almost straight up and down. The streets are made of heavy brick cobblestones, such as they use on the waterfront in Peoria. Back at the Y, we started making plans to camp out, as we were taking a road on which there were no American youth hostels. We also counted our expenses, and they were less than $1 a day. How glad we were to get out of that traffic in Providence. A cop stood in the middle of the street with a stop-and-go sign. No one knew when to go, and the jam was awful. Buster has decided to print signs with our histories, telling where we are going and where we are from. Cars slow up as we cycle along and ask all sorts of questions. Perhaps you would like to know how we keep our expenses straight? We have a common grocery fund, and when it's about empty, we each put in $1. We buy the things we like best. For instance, Ruster likes jelly and I like butter, so we buy both. It's the same with other foods, but we usually like the same. At Fall River, we slept in an Adirondack cabin. It was made of huge logs on 3 sides. In front, on the open side, there was a fireplace just under the roof. It had shelves at the back for beds. These were covered with pine needles. The scout camp was full of 4-H girls and boys, and they came up to see us. Tonight we camp on the canal at Buzzards Bay and wish some of you were here to visit with us. The second article is dated June 27th from Camp Rose at the very end of Cape Cod. Camping on the canal at Buzzards Bay was fun. We found a nice place between 2 small pine trees and pitched tent. It took us some time to make up our mind to put up the tent, but we were glad we did, as it rained so hard that night. After supper, when the tide was going out, we went down to the sand to wash our dishes. Before long, it was too dark to see, so we went to bed, but not to sleep. Every boat whistled, cars honked, and the echo sounded not only once, but 4 times. On top of all, a bell-ringing buoy was on the job all night. The next day was Sunday, and we got up with good intentions of going to church. I started washing for church, but the salt water and soap would not lather. I then wet my face and put shaving cream on, but the stuff just curdled. I finally scraped that off and used just plain water. When we got to church, the people were just leaving, so we went on our way to Cape Rose near Provincetown. We ate dinner under a maple and talked with another scout cycling like ourselves. The next morning, while I was sitting by the fire waiting for Buster to bring the eggs and milk, a chipmunk climbed upon the table and drank some lime we had left in a cup. In fact, he danced and drank some more. I was about 4 feet from him, warming myself, and I didn't move. To watch him was quite a thrill. He ran away when Buster came. We finally came to Provincetown, which is near the tip of the Cape, and got groceries. We then went out to the Cape and set up camp. We nearly gave up hope of getting here. I set up tent while Buster went after water at the Coast Guard station. We couldn't have a fire here, so ate cold meat sandwiches, cheese, and Kool-Aid. After we rested a while, we climbed over an old wrecked rum runner. It was dirty and damp and full of spiders, but we had fun watching the waves come in. They make the earth shake when they hit, and I have an uneasy feeling thinking one may come too far. It is bedtime, and I am finishing this by the light of a candle stuck in a glass. The surf is pounding like a huge waterfall, and the spray comes over the sand dunes and falls down on our tent. We can have no fires to keep the mosquitoes off, and they are already at work. The third article was written in Boston and is dated July 4th. It was published on July 20th. Instead of riding our bikes all the way back to Boston, we came by steamer. We were waiting at Provincetown when the boat came in, and before it docked, a boy on board gave the scout sign. When he got off, he came to us, and we were friends at once. The boat was an excursion boat and had brought juniors and seniors from 3 high schools for their last day of school picnic. They were interested in our trip, and our scout shorts proved an engaging topic. We were tanned the darkest of tans, and we needed haircuts and a general cleaning up, but they didn't seem to mind. It took us 4 hours to cross, and we were glad we arrived after dark, as the waterfront was so very different from in the daytime. Next morning, we gave all our clothes to Mrs. Larson, except our Sunday wool. I'll bet she had never seen a dirtier pile of clothes, and we hadn't washed but once and didn't do such a swell job of it then. At Paul Revere's house, a bunch of small kids stood around willing to say the history of the house for a nickel or a dime. At the Old North Church, we met a similar bunch, but they had a leader whom they obeyed. Quite by accident, we got with a regular Greyhound tour, and they explained all the things to us. You pay 50 cents to climb to the top of the tower where the lanterns were hung. As we started to leave, the very nice old caretaker motioned to us to stay, and when the rest were gone, he let us climb to the top without paying the extra fee. That night, we went to a Cub pack meeting. Here in Boston, a Cub cannot go to a pack meeting unless a parent goes too, but they meet only once a month, so it isn't so hard on the parents. On the way to Lexington, we took the same road that Paul Revere did and studied our history by reading every marker on the way. At Concord Bridge, where the first battle was fought, the river is not much larger than Kickapoo, but is far more famous. We camped at night in Plymouth, and the mosquitoes were simply awful. There were more under our net than outside. Today we went to see the Boston Bees beat the New York Giants. We are going to Salem, Marblehead, and Gloucester next, and then go where the hostile trails lead us. We do not know when or where the fourth article was penned, but it covers some of the activities they experienced between July 5th and July 12th. The end of the article is a little bit of a history lesson on youth hostels in America. At Marblehead, we went out on the neck to see the beautiful estates. They just can't be described, they are so lovely. There was a lighthouse there, and we asked the keeper if we could see how it worked, and he showed it to us. He had been an electrician's mate in the Navy and used his experience to fix up new wiring to the apparatus for the light. He told us it was Marblehead men who rowed Washington across the Delaware during the Revolutionary War. He showed us where to go to see the original of the famous picture, The Spirit of 76. At Salem, we visited the Pioneer Village, which was reconstructed in 1930 on the 300th anniversary of the founding of Massachusetts. Here we saw types of shelters dating from the first one built and the ways they were furnished. Outside the shelters were the pits for log sawing, the brick kiln, and apparatus for making salt. In the village square were the stocks and pillory, where people were punished. Our camp while here was near this historical village. By the ocean was a large rock where we sat and sometimes ate and slept and even washed dishes. Visitors came to our rock, and at their invitation we visited the large General Electric plant at West Lynn. The Illinois State Normal Geography Tour was our near neighbor, so we went down to see if we knew anyone. At Beverly, Mass., we met a Scout mother who is a member of the Scout Mothers Club. She told us how they earned money for their club. Before we left, the man gave us a haddock steak and told us about the codfish packing plant at Gloucester. We went through it and saw every step from where the fish was taken from the salt, skinned, boned, and on to weighing, and then wrapped in paper and packed in boxes. We see so many greenhouses, and they tell us they raise nearly $5 million worth of vegetables under glass. Acres of asparagus grow like corn in long rows. As we were entering a little town at the foot of a long hill, we saw the sign Ivor Johnson, so we promptly turned around and got permission to go through the factory, as my bike came from there. I never knew a bike had so many parts. They make guns here too, and it took us over 2 hours to go through the plant. After 14 miles climbing upward all morning, we coasted down 14 miles and we're at Northfield. This pretty little town is the hub of hosteling. Here it was that Isabel and Monroe Smith first introduced it into the U.S. in 1934. A hostel is a building with separate rooms for the boys and girls, equipped with bunks, mattresses, blankets, and separate washrooms. There's a common kitchen and dining room. Each hostel is in charge of a house father and mother. Usually there is a chain of hostels connecting interesting places or in the open country where there are mountains to climb and streams to follow. It costs only 25 cents for a bed and 5 cents for fuel for cooking. Anyone may go to these hostels who has an AYH pass, which costs $1, but he must not go from one hostel to another in a car, as they are intended for hikers and bicycle riders. We got here early and already the yard is full of bikes. The girls are planning to cook supper, so we are all putting in 17 cents apiece for food. As long as we don't have to cook, we are going to look this little town over. According to the article, Norman penned it on July 13th in Marlborough, New Hampshire. However, the events described appear to have occurred between the 13th and the 16th of July. The hostel building was a very large one. All of the back is devoted to hostelers. There are 6 rooms on the main floor and the bedrooms are upstairs. In back of the building are lovely gardens and places to store bikes. The flagstones in the garden, from the outdoor fireplaces to the barn, are gravestones. The man who lived here years ago was a queer old fellow, and the story goes if people died that he disliked, he would steal their tombstones for his walk. In the large outdoor fireplace are places where he is supposed to have hidden liquor during the dry era. The first night, the hostel staff showed us different trips that the youths of the day had taken, and they were simply beautiful. The snow pictures were nice too, and we learned that winter hiking is popular in the East. Here you can rent skis in the winter as well as bikes in the summer. They accommodate as many as 50 boys and 50 girls at one time. The first morning after we arrived, we were out of our bed by 7 o'clock. After breakfast, we bid some of the fellows and girls who were leaving goodbye, and then we started to wash. When the wash was out, Buster went swimming while I helped a fellow fix his bike. While I was doing this, and later while folding up my washing, groups of delegates from the girls' seminary came to inspect the hostel. Boy, was I ever glad I hadn't gone swimming. In the night, it stormed with plenty of lightning, thunder, and noise. After breakfast, we again helped others to get started and once again said goodbye as we wanted to stay here longer. One of the scouts I met here was at the Jamboree at Washington, D.C. The third day, we joined another group hiking to see the world's largest birch tree. We started up into the hills and passed numerous government lumber mills using up hurricane timber. Finally, we did reach the tree, and it was indeed large, being about 6 feet in diameter, but it surely needed a tree surgeon. Going back, we went by an old deserted village. It smelled of a good story, but I forgot to ask anyone, and no one in our crowd knew anything about it. We got lost and backtracked until we found our trail, and after really rough hiking, we came to Pulpit Falls and had a swim before lunch. The next day was Sunday. By 7:30, we were ready to leave, and all our friends had come to tell us to be careful. The road now went up, and along the side you could look down on a small stream bouncing over rocks on its way down to the river. At the very bottom there was a part that was steeper and you could feel yourself speed up. Then came a grassy plain and our first covered bridge. Neither of us had ever seen one, and I can't describe the feeling or impression it gave me. It was peaceful, quiet, and at the same time called for adventure. Near Marlborough, we saw signs leading us up a steep, steep hill to the hostel. The hostel mother was nice, for when she saw how tired we were, she let one of many sons go down that same steep, steep hill to the store for our groceries while she fed us watermelon. To repay her, we dried all the dishes at supper time and of course got ours washed in the bargain. We often wonder if these hostel mothers are as nice to all as they are to us. After breakfast, we took everything out of our bike baskets and headed for Mount Monadnock. We are back at the hostel now and writing and sending postcards. Buster is lucky. He has sent the last postcard on his long list, but I have lost mine. Some girls have arrived, so we will go and offer to help, and they may get supper for us. You see, this trick has worked before. Article 6 was published on August 17th and was written on July 24th in North Lovell, Maine. The events mentioned occurred between July 20th and July 25th. The day was lovely and we soon reached Meredith, which is a little town on a lovely lake. It was rather cool and the hostel mother gave hot tea to those who cared for it. Some girls were going to sleep on Pinnacle Rock to see the sunrise, so Buster and I carried their blankets 5 miles up to the top. We were good and tired and hungry when we finally got our supper ready. At supper time, 3 girls arrived with one having 11 or 12 blisters on her feet. Imagine. When the girls who had gone swimming with us and started washing dishes, I offered to dry them if they would wash ours. The 5 girls and the house mother let me fix her feet with stuff from my first aid kit. Then, for offering to dry dishes, I was given the last piece of pie. On July 22nd, Buster's cyclometer registered 1,000 miles. We celebrated by eating onagaga for breakfast. It consists of raw oatmeal, raisins, bananas, sugar, and milk. You try it and tell me what it lacks. As we neared Maine, we stopped to talk to a truckload of scouts from Concord, New Hampshire. They could hardly believe we were from Illinois, but our state stripes convinced them. They told us where to camp, and once again the fee was canceled as we were far from home. We think we are real campers. Anyway, we do a pretty good job with an outdoor fireplace. Most of them are like a grill with no chimney. When dishwashing time comes and no girls are there to do it for us, sand and clay are good to take out the grease, and pine needles and elbow grease take the black off the bottom of the kettles. At about 3 o'clock, we came to North Lovell, Maine. It was a very small town, and since we had cycled 43 miles, we figured we'd better stay, as towns and even houses were getting farther apart. But it looked at first as if this was impossible until a Mr. Force said we could sleep on the porch of one of his cabins, which was not being used. When we got to it, he dug the key out of his pocket and opened up the cabin and said we could use it. He went away and we started a small fire in the fireplace and rode a little while, then went swimming. After playing around a while, we came back, all the time wondering what we were going to have to eat, as the stores are closed on Sunday. Just then, Mr. Force appeared on the scene with a quart of milk, 4 eggs, 2 tomatoes, 2 bananas, 2 peaches, and 2 large pieces of blueberry pie. By and by, he came back again and said we could use one of the rowboats if we wanted to, as he was going away. We finished supper eating everything but the pie and then went to the dock. Buster wanted to pass his rowing merit badge, so I put him through the paces. He did them all. Next morning, we swept the house, laid a new fire in the fireplace, locked the door, and started up the path to give the key to Mr. Force. He would take no money for the food or lodging, and he gave us his autograph besides. Letter 7 is not dated, nor is the location given. It was published on August 24th, and there is an error in the headline stating that Norman writes from a Colorado mountain camp. You can see the error was crossed out. I believe the letter was written on the evening of July 30th at Dollycop Camp in New Hampshire. We reached this camp, and the ranger who had been a scout picked us out a very nice place to camp. The people who lived near us have been friends indeed. After the shower, we went to register with the ranger, as the next morning we wished to climb the Imp's Face. The Daniel Webster Council of Boy Scouts built a trail to the top, and there's a place to sleep up there if you wish. It rained so hard during the night, the ranger said we would not be able to climb the Imp's Face. But after the mist had cleared, the guide said we could go. We ate dinner on the Imp's Face and looked back on the way we had come, and at Pinkham's Notch, which was enchanting in the distance. Just across from us was Mount Madison, and beyond it, Mount Washington. Between them was Mount Adams. Next morning, I got up at 2:30 a.m. to climb Mount Washington to see the sunrise. It was so cloudy and the valley was covered with fog and mist, so I knew they would not let us go, so I went back to bed. Thursday night it rained. Boy, oh boy, did it rain. Our tent leaked, first on Buster's side and then on mine. The tent ditches carried away the groundwater, and as long as we lay back to back in the center, the water dripped and ran into the ditches. When the rain did stop, we stretched our bedding out to dry and ate our breakfast and planned on our mountain climb to Mount Washington. The ranger said we could go as it was clear at the top. At the halfway house, we paid our 16-cent toll to keep the road in repair, and then on we went. As we were scouts, we got to go inside the Weather Observation Bureau. It always cost 50 cents, but our registration cards permitted us to enter without paying. The final article was written between August 24th and August 30th, and it ran in the newspaper on August 31st. It covers their adventures in the month of August and provides a recap of sorts for the entire trip. I specifically like the PS. After leaving Camp Dollycop at the base of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, we headed straight for Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, where we took the aerial tramway to the top of Cannon Mountain. At first, we just stood at the bottom and watched the little cars go up and down. Maybe we were getting up nerve enough to get on. We went to see the Old Man of the Mountain and Profile Lake, which is located in the heart of Franconian Notch, and after seeing the flume, we headed back to the hostel. We were soon at the Canadian border, and there was no trouble about the customs, and we were given our entrance papers upon showing our hostel cards. Now the signs were both in English and French, and even the dollar bills were printed the same way. We were trying to get a suntan as we cycled along, but a policeman made us put our shirts on. He said that they wore clothes in Canada, even though it was hot. We had paid our nickel to cross the river into Montreal, and now we paid it again as we recrossed it and started to Plattsburgh, New York. It rained a fine mist, but as we were starting toward home, we covered 69 miles. We were so tired we just couldn't even be interested when they nearly refused to let us by the customs at the border. It was easier to get out of the United States than to get in. It took us 15 or 20 minutes to convince them we were American-born citizens. Back at Northfield, we got ready for our dash for Albany, where we were to take the train for home. At Niagara, we went to see the falls, both on the Canadian and our side. They were beautiful and lived up to our expectations. We arrived in Peoria, having had no serious troubles of any kind. I had spent $85, of which $75 were necessary expenses. It averaged about $1 a day as we were gone 74 days. We ate about 10 candy bars on the entire trip, and these were on mountain hikes. We had no one molest us and found all helpful if they knew we needed it. We carried one Scout sleeping bag inside of a waterproof covering. Our bike basket contained a Scout cooking kit, tin containers for various staples as sugar, salt, and flour. It also had a waterproof cover. I carried the pup tent loaned to us by our own Scout troop. Our clothes consisted of 2 official summer camp uniforms and 1 wool uniform for dress, and the least possible amount of undies. We both had bathing suits and our much-used Scout hats. We used only wool socks, and each of us had a pair of moccasins and a pair of heavy hiking boots. Our clothes were carried in our knapsacks. P.S. Our moms made us ride home every day, and we have an exact expense account and records of every day's menus. Yes, we have decided it was worthwhile and would do it over again. When we first heard this story, we calculated that they traveled about 600 miles. From the articles, we learned that they traveled more than 1,000 miles. Add in the train rides to and from Peoria, and the total distance traveled exceeds 2,000 miles. As Paul Harvey would say, and now you know the rest of the story. But that is not the last time we'll hear from Norman or learn more about his life. We also have his articles and photos about his experiences at the 1937 National and World Jamborees. But more on that later. That's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of Scouting America through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.